All right, friends, we're going to go ahead and get started. Hey, if you haven't met me, my name's Dustin Hunt. I was a church planter in Las Cruces, New Mexico for 8 years, and I am the new executive director for the Southwest Church Planting Network. And so we haven't had a chance to meet. Would love to grab some time with you over Zoom or a phone call. Would love to just get the chance to meet you. But we're kicking off these new monthly trainings, and we're going to run for the next 3 months and take a break for the summer and come back in August. And so what we've done is we've asked some experienced pastors and church planners, some from the Southwest Network, some from other parts, to just talk about a little bit about what are the core ideas that they love to talk to church planners about. And so I want to introduce my good friend, Justin Edgar. Justin Edgar was a church planner in the Southwest Church Planting Network in Albuquerque, New Mexico for many years. He is now the senior pastor at Redeemer in Winston-Salem, North Carolina. And so, Justin, thanks for being with us today, man.
Yeah, man. Thanks for having me. Is this the first one of these you've done?
First one.
Oh, wow. Yeah. Brought in the heavy hitters for the first one, dog.
Trying.
Yeah. What's up, fellas? Like Dustin said, I was a church planner in Albuquerque. It technically was I was brought in to plant a church in 2011 and was doing a church planting apprenticeship with the Southwest Church Planting Network. And the pastor of the church that I was working out of left. And so my church plant became a replant. Essentially, within the first 2 years of me being pastor at the church, we went from about a church of 110 to about a church of 35, 40. And so it quickly became a replant. And that replant journey was about 5 years in time before we found a new space, renamed ourselves, and then I pastored there another 6 years after that. So it's good to be with y'all today. I'm going to talk to you something about that's kind of been on my mind over the last year. A lot of this, none of my ideas are original. But there are things that I've been thinking about and trying to apply in a lot of different areas in the life of my church here in Winston. And I think they apply a lot to church planners. And that's this idea. This comes from a social theorist. Brad probably knows this better than me. His name's Hermat Rosa, and from Andrew Root, who's kind of teased out some of this stuff on these two concepts of control and resonance. So that's kind of what I'm going to talk to you about in relationship to church planting and how this kind of works out. One of the things I like to do to start is I just want you guys to get settled in your seats and maybe close your eyes and take a few breaths and try to center yourself and be present to this moment and to the Lord in this moment. Feel your weight, unclench your jaw, relax your shoulders, and try to be present to this time. Lord, we give this time to you. Just ask that you would work in it and help us to see the places that we are both being pushed and pressed to find control. And I pray this in this moment, you would invite us into something richer, freer, fuller, and the idea of resonance. And so be with us as we talk about these things today, we pray. In Christ's name, amen. Um, so just to kind of conceptually start us is that we are cross-pressured in this moment because of the accelerations of our culture. And you feel that particularly, I think, as church planners. The basic idea is that our world has sped up. Um, Everything has sped up. Information moves faster, and our expectations, both of ourselves and other people around us, the people that are giving to us, the people that are supporting us, those expectations rise faster, accelerate. All the cultural change that's happening in this moment, really since Things have really adjusted a lot since 2016, but particularly since 2021. Cultural change happens, and then the communication mechanisms that we all participate in move at a high rate. And for some of us, feedback can be immediate. And so all of that cross-pressured speed makes us feel pressure, the pressure to keep up, the pressure to respond quickly, the pressure to overfunction as planters and pastors. And what Rosa would say is that it's not just if you keep up, if you maintain the status quo, in our moment, you're actually falling behind. And so I want you to like kind of feel what that feels like in your body, like when you think you are falling behind. Like you guys, like the way the network works, you get planted in classes. Some of you are planted at, certain times. I remember like when Brad Edwards planted his church in Colorado, like I met with Brad on the way out to Colorado and New Mexico, like, and I saw how the table took off and like, and I felt pressure, right? And I had been like doing this for over 6 years at that point. Like there's just this pressure that we have to not fall behind. And if we maintain the status quo, we are falling behind, or we feel like we're falling behind. So it's not just that you're doing this deal, leading a church, planning a church. You're also in a world that is pressing upon you, um, where your churches are being compared and people are comparing you to other churches, and growth metrics are always visible. Like every time, whether you're gathering as a core group or you're gathering in your gathering, you are feeling metrics. And then the communication never stops. So you go home, that phone's in your pocket, and there's always a way to get a hold of you. And so those expectations that are unclear are always present, internal and external. You might not always know what those expectations exactly are, but you feel them instinctually. And so in those places, I want you to think about where do you reach for control? Because control feels like a way to stabilize when you feel unstable. It feels like a way that you can kind of manage keeping up and staying ahead, reducing uncertainty, feeling less vulnerable. It feels responsible sometimes, like the reason we reach for control, because it feels we have a lot of responsibilities. It feels responsible, it feels necessary, and it even feels faithful. But the problem is, the faster the world moves, the more we want to try to control and exert our control over it. And I'm gonna like make the case, the more disconnected we become from ourselves, from God, and from people, and the actual work that we've been called to do. So Rosa says is really helpful. He says the opposite of acceleration is not slowing everything down. It's this term he calls resonance. I'm going to kind of define that a little bit later in this, but I want to first kind of think about this idea of control in a world where everything is speeding up, where your expectations are high, and not just like one of the things I struggled with most when I first started replanting City Pres wasn't the external expectations, it was the internal ones. Um, I was feeling burnt out at the very beginning because of those internal expectations. And I remember I went to a retreat called Men at the Cross, and they sent us outside to kind of try to hear from the Lord. And what I clearly heard from the Lord in that moment was my internal expectations were killing me. I had a young family at the time. I have felt internal expectations as a father. I felt them as a husband. I felt them as a friend. I felt them as a pastor, as a leader, and they were crushing me. And so what I did was reach for control. And so I think this matters for church planners because church planning it kind of uniquely exposes this. In most environments, there is some level of structure, but as a planter, you are the structure and you are imposing the structure. If there is structure at all. And for some of us, like high eyes on the disc, like that structure is very loose. Um, People matter, but butts in the seats matter sometimes more. Like loss feels sharper for the planter, growth feels urgent, and everything feels like it depends on you. So without realizing it, you think if you don't manage this, this isn't going to work. If I don't push, this won't happen. If I don't hold this together, it's going to fall apart. And so that leads to this whole idea of control. So what I want you to imagine, um, I want you to imagine a control panel, like kind of like your soundboard at church. There's dials. I don't know what the soundboard. I've never touched the soundboard at church. I shouldn't touch the soundboard at church. But there's control panels. On the control panel. There's dials. There's sliders. There's levers. Um, each one's labeled. So what I'm going to try to get you to do, imagine what those things are labeled, but I want to try to kind of give you a hint of what this looks like. Because church planning puts your hand on the board every single day. So I want to name some moments in church planning to maybe help you label what's on the control panel and what do you reach for when you feel these things. So, first scenario, whether you're gathering a core group or you've launched your service or you're just a regular pastor who's already planted and you're doing this every Sunday. You show up on a Sunday and this Sunday doesn't land for some reason. So Dustin and I talk about this a lot. I talked about with Jeff White. I coached Jeff White. Like some volunteer doesn't show up, and you're stuck trying to doing the communion setup because they didn't show up, or the room feels off. It feels the if things that you're doing on a Sunday morning feels flat. Your sermon didn't connect. The energy in the room wasn't there. So on the drive home or later in the day, you start processing and replaying it. What do you reach for on the control panel? So for some of us, like I remember the feelings of this, like being in the middle of it. Like there was this impulse to start tweaking everything that we did on Sunday mornings, like from the liturgy to the music to how long I was preaching to what we did for like welcome and visitors. Like, do you start to try to reach for the control panel? I'm gonna start tweaking some things. Do you overanalyze? Do you start finding yourself being critical of not just the one thing that went wrong, but the many things, the other things? Um, do you tighten your grip on your prep for the next week, even though you don't have time? You're limited in your prep as it is. Do you feel the need, and this is a really good one because I think this is one we feel like to bring it harder with our core group or our leaders or our session that I need to like emphasize and bring it to them to try to get them to understand the complexity and the urgency of what's happening right now. So I just want you to try to notice when Sundays fall flat in some way, where do you go on the control panel? What do you reach for? All right, so, scenario two, you notice a key person in your plant is drifting, someone that's important. Um, you know this because they stop showing up as consistently or they eliminate themselves. Like we always knew somebody was like maybe on their way to sliding as they took themselves off the planning center volunteer list. Um, or they maybe just feel distant. Like you kind of just are picking up on the vibes and the vibes feel off. They aren't as engaged. So you feel that in your body, right? Like where do you feel that in your body? Chest tightens. I would feel that like the like almost going down a roller coaster, like in my stomach. Um, what do you reach for in that moment? So I'm kind of anxiously attached. So what I would reach for is like the power of relationship with that person. And I would probably send a text and just like it would be very innocuous text like how you doing, hey, what's up, and then try to like press for relational connection because of my anxiety. That's how I would latch onto control. So that would be the dial I would tweak. Again, you can replay conversations. You can like avoid. This was another one that I do quite frequently still is like if I know that there's some like dissonance in a relationship, my I can have a tendency to avoid it. um, do you start managing that relationship more tightly? Scenario three, giving or attendance dips. You start looking at the numbers, not where you want them to be. What do you reach for? Do you feel urgency? Do you start thinking about what you want to change? Do you feel pressure to fix something? Do you tie it to subtly how you're doing? You internalize it. It's about you. It's about your preaching, about the way that you're showing up to a meeting. Or scenario four, fundraising conversation. You're talking with a potential supporter. What do you reach for in that conversation to garner their support? Is it the shaping of your story that you want to land well? Do you present a cleaner version of reality to garner their support? Do you feel like, man, I better get there's two ways it can go in this in the ask. Like you avoid like making a very direct ask because you're just not really you're feeling too anxious about it, or do you feel like, man, I need to get this ask right? What do you reach for? Um, Last one I'll say is scenario is conflict or tension. When there is conflict in your plant or your church, and you notice the conflicts, you hear about it through a third party. What do you reach for? Again, do you seek to engage it actively immediately? Do you avoid it? Do you try to manage the situations like through triangulation, manage the entities separately? What do you reach for? So I just want you to pause and try to notice what it is that you reach for in some of these scenarios. Where did you feel the pull in your body? The instinct, the thing you reach for, that's your version of control. It's a reflex. It's not really an idea. Like there's these we are reflexive in this. And so I want you to try to name some of the ways that you might reach for control clearly. Um, Control is not just I want to control things. It's when something feels uncertain, I reach for something to stabilize it. Again, that's not all bad. It's human. It's sometimes leadership, sometimes it's care. But my argument, I think Rosa's argument, is that over time, because of the cross pressures that we feel, it becomes the way that we relate to people, ministry, and even God. And so a simple diagnostic line for this is when things feel uncertain for you, what do you reach for to feel okay again? What are the things on the control panel that you reach for that ease your anxiety and make you feel okay? That's the question. So, where do you feel the most pressure right now in your ministries, wherever you guys are at? We have lots of people at different kind of places in plant life and post-plant life. Where do you feel the most pressure right now to produce an outcome, to make something happen? I want you to try to name it, not overthink it. Where is that place for you right now? And the second question to that would be, what feels like it would fall apart if you loosened your grip on it? If you took your hands off of it, what would feel like, man, that's gonna be a disaster. And you feel like you really can't. Because here's what's tricky, like control doesn't usually feel like control. It feels like responsibility, wisdom, stewardship, leadership. It feels like you care. But over time, my argument is it subtly shifts from I'm participating in what God is doing here to I am managing what needs to happen here. And once that shift happens, things begin to change in the way that we pastor and minister and lead. Because control doesn't just affect your workload. Control reshapes your relationships, it reshapes your leadership, it reshapes your experience of God, and it reshapes your own soul. And we know this because we see it. We see it in our
Justin,
brothers. We see
Justin,
that. Yeah,
how
go
did you
ahead.
say that? How did you say that? The control and managing. Can you say that again? Do you remember that was beautiful? And I'm like trying
So,
to write it down.
yeah, it's like over time, right? This shifts from I'm participating in what God is doing here. I'm a participant in this experiment that God is doing here, to I am managing what needs to happen. And once that shift happens, everything begins to change for you. Because it's not just your workload that we're talking about, because it reshapes your relationships, your leadership, your experience of God in your own soul. Um, all right, so what does control actually do to us? Because this is where it gets a little bit more uncomfortable. Control turns these relationships with these beautiful people that are part of your church and your plant and your core group. It turns those relationships into people or problems to solve. So this is what Rosa would say. It turns people into points of aggression. Um, what he means is that when we operate out of control, people and things stop becoming something we receive and participate in this dynamic relationship, and they become something we act upon. So I'll give you an illustration from the car, right? You're driving, unrelated to church planning. You're driving in your car. Everything's great. It's a sunny day. It's nice. You're not in a hurry. You're just going from point A to point B. And suddenly somebody cuts you off, drives slower than you want who's in front of you. Immediately, something that was just blissful, you're not exerting any control over just operating your car on the road. You've left that place. You're just in memory zone, windshield time with whatever you're listening to or thinking about. And suddenly that person who's just driving along next to you becomes a point of aggression. And you have to exert your control on that person in some way. There's a lot of ways we do that. In New Mexico, you flip the bird, right? That's just what you do. You honk your horn, you speed up, you let them know that you're there. It becomes a point of aggression, right? And so, in church planning world, when that volunteer doesn't show up for the time that they're supposed to be there, no matter what the reasons are, they become a problem to fix and an obstacle to overcome and a resource to manage. They become a point of aggression. And what does that do to you? Because I can remember lots of times coming home on a Sunday from one point of aggression to another to watch the Cowboys play. Um, like I can remember what that felt like. Like everything in my life became a point of aggression. And every person, including my own family, became places for me to try to like aggressively act myself upon. So the drifting member becomes a retention issue, and the struggling leader becomes a developmental problem, and the quiet room becomes an energy problem. The conflict becomes something to contain or eliminate. So even these good things start to become things we press into and we white knuckle and we feel. And the shift is, instead of asking who is this person, instead of like entering into with empathy, we start asking what do we need from them to again either us feel okay or to eliminate this tension that we're feeling in our bodies. And so Rosa then moves from point of aggression to people become relationships are meant to be I thou, and they transform into I it relationships. So right, an I thou relationship is a relationship that respects boundaries. There's a thou and there's an I. It's relational, it's present, it's mutual, which is what we want, right? So when we gather a core group, we want this mutual way of being together. What we want in our churches is for mutuality to exist, for people to operate as themselves with all their giftedness, to show up into a space and to bring those gifts to bear upon the community and the place. But what happens when we are exerting control and not finding resonance? They become I it. They become functional, distant, and utilitarian. So control moves us from this relationship to utility. This is not, obviously, you guys know all this stuff. This is not anything like profound. But the hardest part is that even in the I its, we're still kind, we're still pastoral, and we still say all the right things. But underneath, people feel like they are a part of something being managed, not someone being known. So just to kind of like draw this a little bit like closer in, like if you're married, you have a spouse, like what's the difference between managing your spouse and being with your spouse? I remember that I have a friend in my pastoral cohort group, and one of our early meetings, like year one, year two or three that we met, he mentioned something that he felt like he was managing his spouse. And I remember that stuck to me, and I brought it home and I started, okay, what are the ways that I'm showing up and trying to manage Danette? Um, Trying to get from her what I want. Or like one of the things I noticed very quickly is like when I came home, like things would be kind of chaotic with the kids. And I felt this immediate need to like bring daddy's home, right? Like I'm going to bring order to the chaos. And what I was doing in that was really just managing her, not really showing up with her with empathy or even empowering her. Now, again, this is the tension point here is like sometimes you got to do that, right? Sometimes you got to be daddy's home. But again, what it does to our souls, it just becomes the way that we relate to our worlds. And so the important thing here is like the boundaries question. I remember when I first took over as the replanter, the pastor of City Pres, there was a guy in our town. His name's Michael Kelshaw. And his dad was the bishop in Albuquerque for a long time, the Episcopal bishop. Michael is an Anglican pastor, but his church is the least Anglican church of any Anglican church you've ever been to. Like so not any way, shape, or form would it look Anglican to you. But he sat me down and he told me the story about his dad. His dad kept this monkey in his office. And he would, whenever he would counsel, when someone would come in for counseling, he would take that monkey off the shelf and he'd walk over to the person that he was counseling and he would put the monkey on that person's shoulder. And then he would symbolize and he would say, so here's what you're going to want to do. You're going to want me to take this monkey and put it on my shoulder, but it's not my monkey. Like this is your monkey to carry. And that's what happens in our relationships as pastors, that we overfunction in these environments and we start taking on monkeys that we shouldn't take, and the relationship morphs from I thou to I it. We eliminate boundaries. We become codependent with these people in our groups, our leaders. And again, these relationships become utilitarian. And the reason why is because control is our mechanism. We have the dial, we have the soundboard in front of us, and we start reaching for the tweeters and the sliders to regain control because of the uncertainty that we feel inside of us. And people feel this and they respond. That's the great thing about control, is that people respond to your control, right? The people in your life, they perform. They try to meet your expectations. Some others withdraw. Again, they're responding. They pull back from your control mechanisms. They don't know what to do with it. They resist. They push up against it. They buck up against the goad of your leadership, or they leave. And here's what's hard. We often interpret those responses from those people as the problem. Like, and we've all had these conversations. We've had these conversations with the people that are in our circles. Like, I can't believe that person left. Like, and we think that they left because it was their thing. And maybe it, and sometimes it is, oftentimes it is, but sometimes it's us. It's the ways that we're showing up. And instead of finding resonance, we are settling from control. Instead of asking, what posture am I bringing into this relationship? We interpret those responses as the problem. And what we do then is we overfunction or avoid. We either get big or we get small. It turns inward. Once control takes root, you start compensating. So we fight, we overfunction, we push harder, we take on more, we carry what others should carry. We feel like everything depends on us, or we delay hard conversations. We emotionally disengage. We go home and we drink too much. We numb out. We just try to get through the week. And most of us are oscillating between both of those two poles. Sometimes we overfunction and sometimes we underfunction. Um, and you do this in different ways. Like if you're more in the thinking triad, you do it with your plans. If you're more in the feeling triad, you do it with the things that you feel. If you're more in the acting triad, you start to act more and do more. And the internal cost for all of us is deep-seated anxiety that we have in our bodies. Um, and that over time produces burnout, right? We go the way of chronic anxiety. Um, we use our chronic anxiety to motivate us to engage and to act. We do the mental looping. We get stuck in the loops of, did it go okay? And then evaluate ourselves based on whether it went okay or not. We are emotionally exhausted as a result. We're irritable at home and we're spiritually dry. And then over time, right, what happens to our ministries is it stops feeling dynamic and alive. And it's not because God isn't at work. It's because your relationship to the work has changed. And then, obviously, I think the next place we go is God becomes something that we manage. The most subtle, most important piece. Control doesn't just affect how we relate to people, it affects how we relate to God. So without realizing, we begin to treat God like a force to access. Um, like I can remember like how I would use prayer in my life to try to garner the force to access God in some ways to make my church plant go. Um, God is a result to secure. God is a presence to leverage. And we pray, but often the underlying posture of our prayer is, help me make this work. Instead of like, Lord, I need you to meet me here, and I need you to lead me. And I am lost without your engagement in this. Um, so let me give you a couple questions here. You don't have to answer these out loud. I don't know what this environment is, by the way, Dustin. So I'm just like talking, and I'll leave it open to some questions here at the end. But um, where have people in your church become problems to solve instead of people to love? And where do you feel the need to overfunction right now? Um, where are you quietly withdrawing? And where does your anxiety spike the most in your leadership? And you can think about this in different locations of your leadership. It could be across the table, it could be at your session meetings, it could be in your worship service. I want you to notice that. I don't want you to fix it, and I don't want you to judge it. I want you to be curious about it. All right, so that's control, right? Is there another way to live and lead? Like not less intentional, not less faithful, not less engaged, but a way that's more alive, more relational, more grounded in reality, more open to what God is actually doing. And so this is where I want to come back to the word resonance. What is this idea? Rosa presents this idea called resonance. So I'll give you a quick definition. Resonance is connection. It can't be engineered. It can't be controlled. In fact, the key aspect of resonance is it does not have controllability. It happens when we let go of control and attend to God and others. So in resonance, what Rosa would say, you are addressed, you respond, something real happens in you, transformation of some sort, and you are not in control. That is resonance. So it could be a dialogue where you're having a dialogue with someone else. The dialogue is a back and forth. There's transformation as a result of that dialogue, and you didn't control the outcomes. Um, it's a living relational exchange that changes you that you cannot force. So control says, I act on the world to produce an outcome. Resonance says, I'm encountered and I respond, and I couldn't control what happened. So control is usually one directional. Resonance is relational and multi-directional. Now, where this shows up in everyday life, okay, just give you some like things to kind of identify with this. You're visiting Brad Edwards in Colorado. He takes you out for I'm picking on you, Brad. He takes you out for a hike, and you go at just happen to be at the right time of day where the sun is kind of leaking through the trees, and you turn a corner on a bend and you see like this deer out there, and it becomes like this conversation between you and creation where like you are transfixed and you're kind of transformed by the moment. Like something happens in you, you feel something, like that's resonance. And Brad could take me out the next day on the very same hike, and we could do the exact same route and not experience that thing. And we could try to control it, and it then ceases to be in a resonant moment, right? It's that it's that conversation that unexpectedly opens up something in you or in them. It's that relationship where something real happens that you didn't plan. You entered into it and there was a resonant moment. Now, why this matters for church planting? Because church planting is not primarily a system to build. It's a living thing to participate in. It is a living organism that you are participating in. And it cannot be controlled into life. It can be cultivated and attended to and responded to, but it cannot be forced. Now, this is biblically just how God works, right? You think about the way Jesus engages people, not forcing outcomes, not managing impressions, not controlling responses. He's like present, he's attentive, he's responsive. The woman at the well, right? Like he does show up at a particular time of day. And there's this resonant exchange that happens with this woman through questioning and curiosity. He meets people, he addresses them, he invites responses, and something real happens. The key shift is from how did I make this happen to where God was already at work and how did I join him in the work? That's resonance. Now, there's an important clarification here. This does not mean being passive or not preparing, not leading, not caring about outcomes. It means you let go of the control panel or you don't immediately reach for the control panel. You are patient before you move into control. You're not the engineer of your church. You're participating in something that's alive. Um, so I kind of want to like lead you through some scenarios of this, where we actually experience resonance with God in our ministry. Um, you rarely meet God in the places where you are the sole person in control. You meet him where you are addressed and something breaks in and something happens that you did not choose or cannot manage. I cannot think of how many different worship services where that happened. Almost always when I thought I had this like money, like sermon, and I walked off away from the pulpit thinking, oh yeah, that hit. I would hear nothing but crickets. In the moments like where my sermon sucked and I thought it was the worst thing I ever heard or said, how many times people would come up to me and say, man, that really like something happened. And there would be specificity to what they said to me. Like this is the things about resonance. So I want you to think about resonance with God and failure, because a lot of what we do as pastors and planters is through the mechanism and lens of failure. Every church planter has these moments, right? The launch didn't go how you thought. The key leader who leaves. I'll talk a little about this later. I'll save this for a second. But the relationship that fractures, the season where you feel like things have just really stuck for you in your church and you feel really don't know how to get out of it. Um, in those moments, everything you want to do is fix it, recover it, tighten your grip, regain control, or pull back. But what if these moments are not interruptions, but the place where God meets you in your ministry? Because in failure, right, your struggles aren't working. Your control is exposed. Your limits are undeniable in your failures. And suddenly, like in these moments of failure, you realize like you cannot manage this thing. And these are the moments I think where God addresses you. And often what you hear, if you can stay present into that, which is really, really hard, guys, when you fail, I feel my failures very internally. But in that moment, you realize I am not the one holding this together. And God's grace truly is sufficient. These moments are resonant moments, not because it feels good, but because failure strips you down so you can respond and so something real can happen. and you can be changed in a way that you could not have controlled it, or you would in a way you wouldn't have wanted it to control it. So think about this question: where has failure in your church plant actually formed you and been a resonant moment for you? The other converse to that is resonance with God and surprising success. On the other side of this, sometimes things like work, like people show up, you feel the momentum building, you finally got to critical mass. I'll never forget, like in 2015, 16, when my church finally reached this point of critical mass where I didn't have to fret every Sunday about visitors are going to come and they are going to think this place really, really sucks because there's only 40 people in this room. And we met some kind of like whatever that number is. I don't really know what that number is, but it felt like 75 or 80 in my context. Like once we hit that, it's like I could stop worrying about that. I could stop being anxious about that. So when you have this surprising success, and there are these moments where you think, this is it, bro. We've made it. This is what we were trying to do. But if you slow down, there are these moments where you realize in that surprising success, I didn't do anything here. Like I've been doing the same bad things every week, and suddenly something happens, right? And the conversation that landed in a way that you couldn't have scripted, someone changes in a way you couldn't produce, a sense of life that emerges that feels like given and not achieved. The moments where you're not the engineer, you're just like a witness to what happened. That's resonance because you are addressed, you respond often with gratitude, praise, sometimes with fear. Like, what the hell just happened? Like, I don't know what just happened. And it kind of freaks you out. Um, and you can't replicate it. You could, I do too. I preach now twice on Sundays, right? Um, it's a weird thing when you preach twice. Like first sermon, what I've realized is like when I show up and I feel like the first sermon is like together, and I feel like that first service, man, it goes really, really well. And in my head, I'm like, okay, how can I replicate this in the second service? And I can't. And if I show up in the with the first sermon, it's like, I got to do some tweaking in between services. Then I feel like the second service has that same like level of like resonance. Like it's the danger here is that in this moment of surprising success is that we take that moment and we turn back to control and we say, how can I reproduce this? How can I scale this? How can I make this happen again? And just like that, we lose the very thing that we were given. So where have you experienced something in your church that you could not manufacture? How can you note that? How can you like sit into that and go, okay, where did I like let go of control here to experience resonance? Um, the other thing that I'm gonna give you two more scenarios. Resonance with people, right? This is the center of our pastoral work. Control says, how do I lead these people effectively? Resonance says, how do I actually be with these people? I know for me, like my chronic anxiety has kept me from being with people more than anything else. It's kept me in these moments of like trying to be the smartest guy in the room, trying to have the thing to say, the right thing to say, feeling the pressure to say the right thing as the pastor. Real ministry rarely happens in controlled environments. It happens in moments like late night conversation, a confession you didn't expect. I remember one of my core group, one of the people that were a part of my core group, they came to my house one night because I didn't have an office. I had a garage, and they came and sat in my garage with me. And I didn't know what was going to happen in the conversation. And in that conversation, the husband, for the first time, admits to his wife that he had an affair. And I remember what that felt like. I can feel that now in my body. And it became this like beautiful moment. But I remember feeling like, we get placed in these very weird places as pastors. They're like, it is the strangest thing to be in that room when that happens. And I remember what that felt like in my body. And I remember that the conversation, ended up being something that was redemptive and beautiful. Um, Now they're now divorced. So it doesn't like even resonant moments can't like always save that. It was many years later, but I remember what it felt like in that room. And I was able in that moment to be with those people and to grieve with them. These things come upon us, the moment of grief. One of the things that really solidified our church plant was um, one of my elders in training. Um, he had a little girl, her name born. Her name was Elizabeth, or sorry, was Isabella, and she was born, and she lived a day. I was at Chick-fil-A next to the hospital, coming to do a visit with them, and things were kind of like they weren't sure what was going on. And I remember he texted me, and he said, "I need you to get over here right now." And so I ran across the parking lot and walked into this room, and I held a dead baby. And that moment became like it was a lot of things in that moment. But for my little church plant, that became this like weirdly resonant moment for our community. We all gathered around them. It became a mile marker moment for us. And it really did like bring us together in connection and as a community that I don't know what else could have. But it became like this weird, like resonant moment. Um, and people were transformed by this experience of grieving together. And so when deep transformation happens in relationships, when was the last time you were surprised in a moment with someone in your church? The last one I'll give you is resonance and culture formation. Um, when you plant a church, you start with a vision. Who is this for? What will it look like? What kind of impact do we want to have? That vision matters. It's controlled. And so one of the things like I want you to think about in this is that we have like semi control in this as church planners, but we don't have ultimate control. We can't control outcomes. And we often try to put ourselves in that position to control those things. And that's when resonance leaks out. Like what Rosa would say is the world withdraws when we exercise control. Like the minute we start to exercise control, like creation, people, things actually withdraw in the world. They move away from you, not towards you. And so when I started this, I like wanted to have a missional church, right? That was what our vision was. So we were going to have neighborhood engagement, an incarnational presence. We were going to try to lead, like be a center for cultural renewal, like all of us kind of born out of Keller. Like this is kind of what we were after. Um, but what I noticed in my plant is that the people who were showing up to my church were transplants, people in transition, people who came to New Mexico from other places and other environments, and they didn't stay long and they left and they moved away. And searching people, hurting people, stable people, but they were all kind of like, I'm a New Mexican. My key elders were New Mexicans. I'm like, why are we not reaching New Mexicans? We are meant to be a missional church reaching New Mexicans. Why don't we look like the culture? And I thought at first that we were off mission. And so I was trying to exert my control on our culture because it wasn't what I intended. And then there was this critical moment that happened right before we kind of solidified and replanted. And I was trying to redirect, I was trying to push towards the original vision, I was trying to resist what was emerging. But the resonance response came. God got my attention by seeing what God was doing here. And slowly over time, I began to see like this new definition isn't a distraction. This is our new calling. And we transitioned from a missional church to a sending church, a place where people came in for a season, connected to us through community and relationship. They were formed in our community, and then they were sent out. And so we became a church that celebrated, even though it grieved and it was hard. We became a church that celebrated every sending out. We brought people up to the front. We benedicted them. We blessed them. We sent them out to go do ministry in another place. I did not design that. I discovered it. It was resonance. Nothing changed. Like faithfulness didn't change, my posture didn't change, but we moved from like we're building this thing to we're like receiving this thing from God and joining him in what he seems to be doing amongst us. So the questions for culture is where is your church becoming something you didn't plan? And are you resisting it or discerning it? And what might your church actually be for this new season or new chapter or this new loop? And so resonance in church planting shows up in these at least these four places: failure, success, people, culture. And on all of it, I'll end with this. The invitation is the same. How can you be present, stay open, let yourself be addressed, be transformed by being addressed, be an agent of addressing that doesn't try to control it, um, that leaves it open for transformation through dialogue and conversation. Because church planting is not just building a church, it's being formed by God in the very thing you can't control. All right,
So good,
that's
Justin.
my
Thanks, man.
presentation.
Hey
Questions?
guys, we have like 5, 10 minutes for questions. Feel free to ask Justin anything you want.
Hey, Justin. I haven't seen you in a while. It's Aaron Scott here.
Hey, Aaron, what's
Um,
up, bro?
hey, man. Uh, loved what you shared there. Thank you so much for spending the time doing that. When you went from yeah, replanting the church there, um, yeah, I'm just curious what what were the and you alluded to this I think a little bit, but what were the what was that like in that first year when you kind of had to pull back and reassess with that original planter, leaving and everything? What was that like in that first year, kind of gathering I don't know if you had I can't remember if you had elders back
I did
then.
have elders, yeah. So
Y'all were
the, the,
particularized, if I
the way
remember
it
right.
worked for me, just quickly, is I had one elder who was with, we had one ruling elder when Mike left.
Okay, that's right.
And right before Mike, so Mike went on sabbatical. He didn't really come back except for 2 Sundays. And in those 2 Sundays, because I was just the assistant pastor, I couldn't really do anything.
Yeah.
We installed two new elders. So at that point, we had three elders. And Paul, the original ruling elder, he eventually rolled off in that, like after like year two, I think. But in that first year, right, we lost about over half our congregation, and we had 9 families move away in that first year and a half. We had 3 divorces. So like I was actually like I had Jim Anger was in Lubbock at the time, but Jim had closed the church in Philadelphia. I met with Jim and I talked to him about like what do you do when you close a church? Like how do you know like you need to close a church? And then I was also meeting with Tom Gibbs, and Tom like helped me a lot. Like San Antonio and New Mexico have some similarities, and so he really helped me kind of think through like how do we like rethink about this vision of what kind of church we want to become now that Mike's left. And we basically lost all the people that were connected to Mike, and the people that stayed were essentially my core group. Like those were I mean, I had a lot of those people moved away in that first year too, but essentially my core group and all the new people that came since I'd been here were the ones that stayed. And everybody else that was kind of attached to Mike, for the most part, there was a couple families. Like when I left City Pres 2 years ago, there were um, two original families, no, three original families plus me, like 3 families that were there before me, essentially, and that's it.
And
Justin,
how
what
go.
do you think you would do today as a pastor if you didn't learn the stuff you talked about today? Like, what kind of man would you be?
Um, I mean, I think I would have. That's a really good question. I do think it would have been less chaotic for my family. I guys, I feel fortunate. Like at just the right times, it felt like God saved me in a lot of this. Like I had that retreat at Men at the Cross. where I really had to deal with my internal expectations. And that opened me up to a whole world, y'all, about my story that I had not done any work on prior to becoming a planter. So that like kind of led me into this whole world. And when we like finally like replanted officially, became City Press, changed from Crossroads to City Press, found a new location. That first year was more hellish than my original first year.
Mm,
Like I thought we would take off, and we actually shrunk in that first year, and we had a huge financial like crisis. Like no one was watching the books in our like the bank account. Like I certainly wasn't. Um and it became like someone made aware to me, "Hey, Justin, we have like $8,000 in the bank and like payrolls coming up." And at that point I had two part-time employees plus myself. And in that like next preceding like 3 months, there was a church that closed in Scottsdale called um, Christ Covenant, I think is what name of it was. And Andrew Graham was the planter that was closing that church down, and they donated to us. We were the only church outside of Arizona that got money. They donated $100,000 to us.
mm,
Um, some guy that visited my church that ended up at Mosaic Church, he's one of Mosaic Church's ruling elders now. He visited my church and he connected with me and he liquidated an asset and gave us $25,000. Like again, none of this stuff like I even asked for. It just
mm,
like came upon me, right? And then uh in town, Mars Hill Church had become something else. Um a lot of Mars Hill people came to my church for a season and helped us with critical mass. But their elders gave us a check for $10,000. And Desert Springs Church, a church that I worked for years ago, gave us a check for $10,000. Like all this stuff happened to like keep us liquid. Um, but that first year was really, really hard because I thought we had arrived and we had replanted. And then I was kind of back. I kind of felt like I was reliving Mike's story because Mike bought this building and then he burnt out and left. And I was like, oh crap, this is what's going to happen to me.
mm.
Um, so I mean, all these different things happen to like save me. Like, but I do think one of the key things I think my children would have experienced a different me, a more present me, and my wife would have experienced a more present me, and I wouldn't have overfunctioned as much. I would have been less anxious. That was a really good question. I'm sorry that was a long answer.
That's good. Let's do one more question and then we'll pray and dismiss.
Yeah, Justin, everything you're saying describes me pretty well.
Yeah.
So maybe this is me just, uh, this is me feeling uncomfortable, but there are so many things that there's just so many things as a church planter that you're expected to do, right? Like
Yep.
your job description's enormous and it's constantly changing and growing. And there's a part of our job that's extremely relational, right? And that seems to be what you're describing. But there's also a part of our job, like, that is just, you think of it more as traditional work. How do you do these two things? I felt it when I started just switching hats from sermon prep to fundraising. It was
Yep.
just totally different energy,
Totally.
wildly different energy. And how am I supposed to maintain these kinds of two different kinds of energy? How have you found? And I don't. It doesn't sound like it's a balancing act. How do you make sense of that? Because there's obviously stuff we have to do without necessarily taking it on ourselves as if it's an identity, or without turning people into points of aggression.
Yeah.
How do you make sense of that?
I mean, I like to think about this like as a planter, it feels like as a when you're a parent, right? You wear all these hats as a parent. Like you have to show up in these spaces, um, and you want your kids to turn out a certain way, like fully function form adults. And that I thought that in order to do that, I really had to get these things down perfectly. I had to dial them in. And so I instituted lots of systems into the way that I parented. And I did work on reading the books. And again, I'm not saying those things are necessarily bad, but there has been a shift as my kids have gotten older, where they're adults, where I can't parent in the same way, and I have to relinquish control, and that was always the goal. So like I would just like say to you, like the goal of you being a pastor of a church plant is always to let go. Like you're, eventually hopefully you come to a time where you're sending another church out to plant another church, and you're going to have to let that stuff go. So try to start with the end in mind of like, this has always been the pilgrimage. And how do I show up in each individual space, not trying to like white knuckle this thing and make it happen? You do have to have systems. You do have to have some level of semi control to this. But at some level, like the outcomes that happen are going to have to be relinquished in both individual conversations, fundraising conversations, leadership conversations, and even like as you develop the system, like it's going to have to be adaptable. Like your leadership is going to have to constantly adapt based on the change. It's almost like your marriage. Like you're married to, I've been married 30 plus years, and I have a lot of different versions of a spouse. And she has a lot of different versions of a spouse, probably maybe a little less in our case, but I've had to adapt and learn and be transformed in these things. And the minute I try to bring control to that, it usually goes pretty bad. I don't know if that's helpful.
That's very helpful. Thinking about the goal, like your vision is towards this thing. You have to do a lot of things along the way, but what's your aim? That's really helpful.
Root's book is called The Pilgrimage and Letting Go. It's really about parenting and ministry. He takes this pilgrimage. It's where I first kind of read about Rosa, and then I read Rosa's book. And then I've kind of been trying to put it into practice here at Redeemer, but also like with the pastors that I meet with. Like we had our pastoral cohort group, and this is what we talked about. We talked about it in our marriage, in our parenting, and in our ministry. We talked about a lot in our preaching. Like when I feel like things in my preaching aren't going well in the moment, in the live event, like what do? I usually get more impassioned. I usually get louder. Like instead of like learning to trust that God is present in this moment, and I can't control what's going to happen anyway. So how can I just try to be present in this live event instead of like trying to like evaluate it and then respond to my evaluation, which probably isn't accurate anyway.
Justin, thanks so much, man. It's so good to be, listening to you today. You've played a huge role in my life, so I really appreciate you taking the time to share with us. Hey, for the rest of us, the last Tuesday of the month is going to be our next call. That's going to be with Scott Brown. He's the senior pastor at New Valley Church in Phoenix, Arizona. He's a member of the Southwest Church Planting Network, so you'll definitely want to tune in for that one. So last Tuesday of the month. Also, this is recorded, so we're going to put it online. So feel free to send it around to friends you have, other planters, pastors you have. Brad Wright, can I ask you to just close us in prayer?
Absolutely. Let's pray. Father, thank you so much for the brotherhood that we have and the fellowship we have in serving in the church in the ways that we do. And thank you I just think about some of the words that Justin said. You're deeply interested in our personal transformation as we seek to serve you as pastors. And so would you do that? Would you take the words we've heard and the reflections we've had, our own little stories involved in this, and just help us to see you more clearly, to rest in you? This is the week we celebrate resurrection. Bring new life in us. Thank you for Justin, for the work of your spirit in him. For each of these who are here, Father, would you bless their churches this week, Father, and encourage the discouraged and sustain us. We entrust all of this to you and ask you to accomplish your purposes in and through us, Father, because you are good. In Jesus' name we pray. Amen.
Yeah. Thanks,
Hey,
guys, for being here. Appreciate it.
Thanks for letting me be here with you all.
Thanks, Justin.
Yeah.
Thank you, Justin.
Thanks, Justin.